Welcome to the Growth Buyer Podcast, where we engage with top business leaders who share their experiences and provide real insights that help them attract customers, retain staff, and grow their bottom line. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hi there, I'm Kevin Horrigan. I'm the host of the show, where I feature inspiring business leaders from various backgrounds and industries who are willing to share their insights and stories. Our podcast is brought to you today by Spinutech. Spinutech is a leading digital advertising agency with 160 team members who help their clients attract new customers, grow existing accounts, and ultimately help those companies be more successful. Spinutech, thank you for your partnership today. Our guest today is Jon Tsourakis. Jon is President and Chief Revenue Officer of Oyova. Jon is a serial entrepreneur, seasoned business leader, and strategist. As a sales and marketing expert, Jon is constantly staying ahead of brand identities, business communications, buying behavior, and latest best practices of sales and marketing platforms and processes. Jon is going to share his story on our Growth Buyer podcast today and share all the successes and learning lessons. Jon, we look forward to hearing your stories and welcome to the Growth Buyer podcast.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So Jon, maybe just start a little bit, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, maybe where you went to school, maybe when you're a young lad, what you aspired to do when you grew up for a living, a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm a third generation Floridian. I grew up in Tampa. When I was a kid, I mean, there was all types of different things I wanted to be. I wanted to be a marine biologist at one point. I wanted to be a professional skateboarder, professional motocross. I was in a band, like all these things that really, didn't make sense according to my father's vision. They owned a construction company, and so I worked for them. They did not want me going to school at the time, and I kind of fought with them to some extent, where I was ultimately fired in front of a group of people to be taught an example. And then I paid my way through school, and then I ended up in the agency biz.
Wow, that's an amazing story in itself. I think I might just want to double click on that for a moment. So, you grew up in a third generation Floridian. Father was in the construction business. Did you have a desire to be in the construction business, or was it just an expectation your parents wanted of you?
There was parts of it that I really liked. Like, I love the idea of building something, and I love seeing like how that comes together. The parts when you're doing it in Florida is it's brutally hot. I mean, it is just a summer of unloading a lumber package in the middle of nowhere for this giant luxury home where it's just like a concrete desert is something that really didn't appeal to me too much. I grew a fondness for AC. So I liked parts of it, but ultimately I didn't think anybody that's worked in a family business understands, like it's a struggle. For some it works out. For me, it definitely didn't. I love all those people, but we didn't see eye to eye on things.
Yeah, no, and I think there's always an interesting family dynamic, and it takes a lot of work to be able to figure that out. And we've had quite a few guests in the Growth Buyer podcast who are in that family dynamic, and it's definitely it's definitely different than going to work for somebody you don't know and who doesn't.
Yeah, you got to keep your mouth shut, and I wasn't good at that at the time.
Well, and again, it might stifle the creativity of the younger generation by having to follow respect as opposed to maybe being a little more entrepreneur and things of this nature. But it sounds like that experience gave you an opportunity to put yourself into school, and you paid for it on your own. Tell us a little about what did you choose to study in school, and what were you thinking your outcome would be at the exit of school?
So I knew I wanted to study business. Even when I was in high school, it just made sense, right? So if you understand the mechanics of how something's running, whether it's the economy or just individual businesses themselves, to me that just seemed like a fail-safe. No matter what you do, sure. You could have a terrible popsicle stand or something, and you'll be able to figure it out. Yes. So that's where I was at. Whether it was going to be a general contractor, which was the initial idea, but when I got into school. Also, when I was younger, I was always interested in advertising. I always loved movie trailers and really good commercials. And so I was like, all right, let me go to school for business. And then there wasn't really an advertising add-on, but they did have a decent advertising school at USF where I went. I just decided to study marketing instead. And that's how that went.
And so you had business, but you're creative and then took on marketing. Did you have an idea of what your first job out of school would be when you were going through that journey?
So I tried to apply at some ad agencies while I was in school, and what they were paying was just embarrassing. And
Right.
and I spoke to some that were at decent levels, and it reminded me of why I quit being in a band. I played heavy metal. We toured a little bit, and I met the guys that I knew were at the apex of where we would ever get, right?
Yes.
And some really good bands, and they were broke. I was like, okay, all right, this doesn't make sense. And I had that same feeling where I'm like just speaking to some of these other people, and I get it, you got to pay your dues.
Right.
But when I was in school, there's this guy that used to copy off some of my work, and he said, "Well, hey, why don't you come to work for my dad and me? We have a marketing firm, and it focused in the healthcare space, and that rapidly grew. And yeah, that's how I kind of got to put into practice what I was learning in school."
Yeah, no, I mean, everyone's journey is so interesting. Going back to just your foundation of knowledge that you chose to put yourself through school for, it's interesting. So many of the guests on the Growth Fire podcast have chosen business or finance as a background. And I think I have a good friend of mine named Jamie Harden, who's a fellow YPO member of mine and past guest. And he had the same journey. He came from a family that was, he calls them military brats, multiple generations of military leaders in his heritage, and he thought that'd be his career. But when he got to school, he got fascinated in business and finance. And while he started his career in finance, it was really that background that gave him the flexibility of becoming an entrepreneur. And it could have been probably any industry that he chose to want to get into, but it was having the foundation of business or finance. And I'm seeing so many past guests leverage their education in what would have been thought of as a stereotype to go into one direction, but they're just really using that foundation and then find the passion of where that may take them and not be prejudged into a particular career sector that maybe that curriculum typically would have taken. And it sounds like you started in business, but you had a creative itch and found yourself, trying to find the advertising route, but just not seeing the end game being worthwhile. And so it's really interesting to hear that. So you go to work for this healthcare marketing company. Tell us a little bit about what your first responsibility is and how you grew there.
First responsibility, I started in the accounting department. Yeah, because that's where they needed help. Yeah, I know. And that's something I am not a fan of.
Yes.
So after that, they realized that I had talents elsewhere. And some of the things that I did is I started just redesigning packaging. And I did that on accident. So they were coming into the accounting department, and I realized how much they were paying for these boxes to ship everything out, and they were unbranded. I was like, this is just ridiculous. So what I did is I contacted a box company. I had it designed with all the branding, had some CTAs added on there. And then I saved the company. I can't remember. I think it was like $180,000 a year by making this change, not including whatever the sales were. Granted, we didn't have a trackable number.
Right.
And then they're like, all right, well, I think this guy's, kind of decent at some of these things. And then there was this product that came in that we needed a name for. And I came up with the name at the time. It was called The Freak. And the product ultimately failed, but it was FEREQ. I remember I was speaking with an attorney at the time that said, there's no way that Sony's going to release the trademark on it. I said, and I looked at the product data and I said, I'll bet you everything that I have that they'll release it. I was so confident because I think they had it for a certain number of years. No products were ever launched.
Right.
And it turns out that they did. And I was right. The dude never paid me anything on that bet. But
right.
So I had these little wins, and then I started getting into the sales side of things where we were pitching accounts and we were selling like healthcare based products, which aren't the most fun, but you can make anything fun if you actually just roll up your sleeves, take ownership, and put your heart into it.
So what a journey. Start in the accounting department, end up doing some product development, end up saving the company a lot of money. Who knows what the upside is by the packaging that you did and the calls to action, all that stuff. And then get into sales. So you almost really covered full circle what you could have done to help this company. At some point, something must have changed, because I know you're a serial entrepreneur and you started numerous companies in your past. Where in your journey did you decide that you didn't want to work for somebody else and you wanted to start your own business?
I've always known that I wanted to start my own business, but you have to dive in and get some experience. And hats off to those people that just do something without it. So it really came down to we won. There was a company called Sears at the time, and we won their licensed business account. So that's like their hearing aids and things like that. And these consultants bought in that created some other big brands. And I saw what was happening from a corporate perspective. I was working, 18 to 20 hours a day. And what's the nicest way to say this? The consultants undermined a lot of what was happening to the original leadership. They were trying to push them out, like a lot of private equity guys do.
Sure.
I was being used as a pawn. So that's the day that I quit, when I really realized that. And I started my agency that day. And I think ultimately it came down to, I'm doing all these things anyway. I have this sense of ownership. I'm literally killing myself to get something across the finish line. And these people are just using me. I said, right. I want to create an environment that is better for people and better for our clients, that doesn't have that type of lack of integrity.
I love you sharing that story, John. And it's funny, 2 nights ago, I was at the grocery store shopping, and I ran into a guy that I haven't seen in probably 8 or 9 years, but it's a guy who changed my life. And I was working in the hotel industry, hospitality industry, working 7 days a week. And I ran into him at a restaurant one night 20 years ago. And I'm wearing a suit and tie at a restaurant on Clearwater Beach, and like 7:30 at night. And what are you doing here? I'm like, eating dinner. I just got off work. Said, how many days are you working at that place? I said, 7. Like, you're working 7 days a week there. I said, well, one day, my day off, I have to go in at 7:00 in the morning and turn in some reports. Yeah, I work 6 days a week outside of that. It's like, have you ever considered working for yourself if you're going to make that kind of time commitment? And I just saw him the other night. He was asking me how I was doing. And I was really, really tempted to say, do you know you changed my life? And he doesn't know this. I've recorded this a couple of times before, but he changed my life. Looks like you had a self-realization based on conflict and adversity that you were going to make that a pivot to change your life. And it's amazing sometimes the guests on the Growth Fire podcast, their journey isn't a pre-planned step-by-step plan that absolutely every step was an expected step. I so often find guests find adversity is the trigger point to create new opportunity. And so that day you decided to start your own agency. That adversity created the trigger point for new opportunity. Tell us a little about your journey becoming an entrepreneur for the first time.
Yeah, I did it at the worst time possible. In 2008, man, like the world's on fire. Banks are crashing. And it was in hindsight, the worst time to ever start it, because we had to do everything possible. And I was worried about non-compete. So I couldn't leverage anybody that I had worked with before. They seemed like they were going to be a bit litigious.
Yes.
So I had to start anew. And I always wanted to push the digital side of things. And I remember I sold, the first thing I sold was like a week out of of my new venture. And I sold a logo for like $250, man. And I know, I might as well just gave it away.
Home run.
But that was it. It's like, all right, as soon as you get one, right? It's just, okay, you prove that this works, and then you go through. And yeah, I mean, I'm grateful that I did it. And I think to the point, the guy's saying what it is. Yeah, if anybody has a sense of ownership, they need to do something for themselves. And I think just in life, usually the safe thing is rarely the most rewarding thing.
Such a great, I'm going to repeat that. Usually the safe thing isn't the most rewarding thing. So that's a great nugget for our guests. Usually the safe thing is not the most rewarding thing. So I appreciate you sharing that, John. You know, it's funny too. We talk about adversity creates opportunity. I had another podcast guest of mine earlier this week, a guy named Scott Price. His career started because of a downturn in the marketplace and part of really the Enron scandal from years prior. And he found himself in a new opportunity where he was bringing in a significant part of the business, doing it for somebody else. And that business division was kind of was being sold to some other entity. And when he was going to the new entity, they were going to provide him much upside for being able to grow that business practice. And he decided to go off on his own. And he said within his first 2 signed contracts, he was earning as much as he was working full-time for this other company, but still had so much upside and opportunity thereafter. And, you know, you talked about your $250 logo sale as being an opportunity to, you know, that was a test of the water, but gave you the confidence to move forward. And so often that sometimes what's the easiest may not be the most rewarding. And two most recent podcast guests I've had have shared the same story. And I think those are great nuggets for our audience to learn about growth is that the easy path may not be the one that leads to ultimately the most rewarding.
Yeah. And I think multiple people need to look at where are they scared? What are they afraid of? And then try to push on some of those things that stretch.
Yeah. And, there's the old saying, risk and reward. And so, well spoken, Jon. Jon, I know you took this startup company and eventually decided to merge with another company. Can you talk about what was your motivation to merge?
Yeah, I looked at what we were good at and taking revenues kind of like flat for a couple of years. And I realized that we were spending a ton of money on dev talent to the degree we were just over positioned in that specialty. So I merged with a partner that we were sending some work to. We knew each other for quite some time, and it's proved beneficial because I was seeing the commoditization of what was happening with design and copy and all these other messaging things and whatnot, and even ads. And you have to with your offering realize what's important to your customers best, and also what are you the best at selling. I think some people can stretch too far in other areas. You might be really good at it, but you can't connect with an audience to do it. Well, you're ultimately going to fail because sales are going to be the lifeblood to get the engine going. Yeah,
absolutely. So it sounds like, you were looking for an opportunity to maybe find a partner who, from a software development perspective, maybe had, maybe made a few more mistakes so they're not making as many, so to speak. But you had a good sales engine going. Talk about, as this company is today, tell us about your company. Who are you, what you guys do, and a little bit more about what your role has evolved to today.
Yeah, we're Oyova. Appreciate you saying the name right. We have a team of a little over 30, and then we focus on three different areas. I break them up into three different buckets. One is digital marketing, starting with strategy, and then of course the execution and production through all of your digital marketing channels. Two is building your hub. That's either your web app or your website. And then third is where we focus on business critical applications. So with these things, with these three different buckets, we can affect top line revenue by driving in leads and sales, and then we can create the efficiencies through RPA, automation, creating business critical applications on the software side.
Wow! So you guys do a lot. You cover a lot of landscape there.
We do. Yeah, with a small team, we also bring in other partners for other areas where. I believe in something that, and I say this all the time, I don't believe in surprises, good or bad. Nobody, if you're always looking for that surprise, you're going to have 90% of, bad things happening. So with our clients, set clear expectations. If I don't feel it's something that we're confident in or the team's communicating, it's like, okay, we need to bring in another partner. We're going to tell them that we're using another partner. And this is what it's going to look like. And kind of take that from the home building aspect. The home builder doesn't have the tile guys and the cabinet guys and everybody working under them. You bring in the best of the best, and you can build an amazing home doing that.
Well, it sounds like you've learned lessons of, just winning a deal and not knowing how to mature it to the right expectations is a original victory, but a long-term failure. And so it sounds like, you've learned some of those lessons in your journey as well. So, you're now Chief Revenue Officer at Oyova. I think I got that right. It is not the easiest company name to say, but Oyova. So you're Chief Revenue Officer today. Jon, as we're here in mid-2023, what are you seeing as sales or marketing tactics that are helping you move the needle positively? What can you share with our audience that seems to be working for you?
Mass targeting. And when I say by mass targeting, what I mean by that is you have a specialty. Let's say that you're amazing. You're an agency that focuses on roofers or biotech or something. Take your portfolio, get that ready, but get a message that's going to speak to that entire audience and hit them as hard as you can, as many times as you can, and learn from the data and iterate based on what people are responding to, and just keep doing that. The larger the audience based on your set, the better. So agencies that are going after legal or agencies that are going after home services or so on and so forth are doing a great job and pulling in a ton of business because they have that portfolio to back and they have a wide enough audience to communicate to.
Yeah, and so hearing all of that, Jon, I'm hearing what you're saying. It's mass marketing, but you're finding a vertical to mass market within. So maybe differentiation of that specific vertical, but mass marketing to that vertical. is there any particular tactics you're seeing from outbound phone calls, email marketing, paid search, social media? Any particular tactics you see that's generally more result oriented than others, or do you see that different industries have different response rates to different marketing initiatives?
Yeah, I'd say each one's going to have its nuance and idiosyncrasies. I think the thing that works the most is you have to have an outbound campaign. So hit that as many ways as you can. So if you can only afford to do email, do email. If you can afford to do email and direct mail, do those, and phone calls. You'll see if you're actually data driven where the curve falls off and it doesn't make sense, right? So I think the main thing though just comes down to messaging and the offer. So if you're speaking to doctors, it's going to be one thing. And if you really want to take it another step further, some things that we've done is where you can geofence a specific building if you really want to look like they're in their face. I try to move that down the funnel a little bit more. So when they're not answering the emails as much, and then send them notes, send them cards. I mean, you really have to be aggressive. And aggressive, that's what I tell the team. Aggressive doesn't mean mean. It just means persistent. And I have sayings. I know you have some too. I say, all right, the triple P. You got to have positive, persistent pressure. Anything that you want in life that's worth getting, you have to have positive, persistent pressure, and then keep those things. And that's one of the tenets that we use, and we do okay when it comes to deploying in some new business.
And there's lots of nuggets there, John. I appreciate you sharing all that. So, I'm hearing, you're picking a vertical, you're mass marketing to that vertical. And I also heard, the key components are one, the persistence, the positive persistence. I've heard that, the 3 Ps. But secondarily, what I heard is that your messaging and your offer are critical to the success of those things. Can you talk about this is probably a loaded question. Is your messaging and offer always spot on first time? Or can you talk about a little bit about how you modify your messaging and or offer based on response rates?
No, yeah, we've gotten it wrong. I've actually had messages that go out where people will say like, WTF, I have no idea what you're talking about. And it's like, ooh, okay, you can get one of those and you're like, all right, that's fine. But I mean, you get a slew of those. You're like, okay, we got to change something.
Right.
So yeah, it needs to be conversational. It needs to speak to them. And if you can make them laugh somewhere in there, I think that's a bonus. And that's something that I always push the team to do. Like, okay, we want to engage them. And you can educate or you can entertain. If you can do both of those things, then you have a home run.
And this isn't a loaded question, but may seem as one. Love the thought about educate and entertain, right? So are you entertaining because you've got some cute words in there? Are you entertaining because it's a funny image? Is it a variety of different things? What's the entertainment component of it that you see being successful in some of your campaigns?
Usually self-effacing, right? So if we have an outbound campaign that's going out, if you can make fun of yourself in that without degrading your image, but you can kind of make them, chuckle, you're going to create some connectivity, right? When you come on all like strong and everything, it doesn't make sense, right? Because it's like, well, why you contacted me? If you're this, this monolith of an agency, like, why would you even be having a conversation? I should be going to you. So I think, and then with that, I think also having your personality. So if your personality links up to that message, and then they're going to have a conversation with you or anybody else on your team, that connectivity is going to be that much easier. It's just looking at things that are incongruent, and
right.
That's big to me is alignment. How can we align as many things and be willing to make some mistakes?
Sure. You talk about the entertaining fact. I'm just resonating with myself about just what are some cute things, because there are some outbound tactics that do make you raise your eyebrow a little bit and pay a little bit more attention to. And the first one that came to mind, and I see this very rarely, but I do pay attention to it, is like, yes, this is another cold call, or yes, this is another outreach email. So it's tongue-in-cheeking, but being upfront. But this is why it's worth your time. But it isn't just, hey, we're the best at such and such and such. It's like instant delete. It's like, yes, this is another one of those cold outreaches. But here's what we can provide to you. And I do give that an extra 1/10 of a second to review.
Exactly. That's all you need, right?
Yeah. And so, it's just the upfrontness and the entertainment of it and really just the differentiation that, just from my own consumption of being marketed to, it does give me a little bit more pause to hitting the delete button, just to see, just to let the entertainment factor and the uniqueness of it, see if it can resonate better.
Yeah. And I think the other thing, and all this has to come from like experience, right? So you know what's working, what's not, just really testing things. And then once you have your, like, let's say your initial outreach, you have to have things that are equally, if not better, all the way through your funnel until you can close a deal. Because people are going to ghost you, right? You're going to have this conversation. Okay, well, what do you do in that situation? Yep. So I have some messages queued up that are total eyebrow raisers that maybe risk insults a little bit, but 9 times out of 10, I mean, they come back, right? Or they'll respond and be like, okay, like, that's hilarious. That's fine. We're not ready right now. Sorry, wasting it. All right, it's cool. Just give me something. So yeah, we have some of those throughout our funnel as well. And I recommend people work on every piece of your funnel, not just the top, and you'll have higher close rates.
Yeah, I mean, you're sharing a lot of great information today, John. A couple more questions, John. So I really appreciate you sharing some of your go-to-market strategies right now. There's a lot to learn from all of that. Last question I'm going to ask on that particular topic is there any specific metrics or KPIs that you're tracking that you're willing to share?
Yeah. So and kind of going back to that funnel, I try to look at all of it, right? So we have our outbound and then we have our inbound. So outbound, it's just, I want to know number of actions that are out. So if we're sending direct mail for a campaign, if we're sending emails, if we're doing phone calls, I want to know all of those. And I want to know those actions. And then, all right, all those are supposed to lead to a certain number of meetings and calls and so on and so forth. So starting with those, and then it trickles down. And then when it comes to inbound, I look at our SEO. I want to know what our top 3 rankings are. I want that number high. I look at our SEO value. And then paid search. We don't really do a whole lot of that anymore. But if we are doing that, of course, want to see number of leads in based on spend. And then on our social side, the biggest one that's important to me is engagement and impressions. We can have super high impressions, which I've seen, but there's no engagement. I'm like, okay, well, these things are not doing what they're supposed to do. I really want to see a high engagement rate based on a high impression rate.
And I'm just going to do a follow-up. I appreciate you sharing those and do a follow-up with that. Are you managing this all yourself? Do you have one person? Do you have a team? How does somebody as busy as you are, how do you get this done?
Yeah, it's team. So our marketing team lead manages our account, and we have a bi-weekly meeting as if we are a client going over those things. As far as the sales front, I do most of the management on that side, but I set the strategy on the marketing side as well. So it's a team effort regardless. But yeah, I'm highly involved.
Yep. No, great. Thanks for sharing. John, I have 2 more questions for you. Next one would be, have you had any mentors in your career? And if so, would you care to mention them? And what did you learn from them? Yeah,
I've had times. I even consider you a mentor, man. I call you up with things. So yeah. I'd say I've had plenty over the years. I'd say the one that sticks out the most is my boss, where I worked at that agency I spoke about before. He was one of the greatest salesmen that I've ever met, but he was like a deeply flawed guy. Like he's no longer with us. He was a great guy, but like he would be out partying all night. We'd have a meeting the next day, and I worked like for weeks on this pitch, and we're walking into the meeting, and he hasn't even looked at it yet. And I'm like, what is going on? I'm like freaking out, man. Like, because I was like, I've spent weeks on this. This doesn't make any sense. And then he goes in there and just dazzles them. Like, doesn't even talk about anything related to what we can do. And that's the lesson he was giving me there is like, hey, he's like, it's not about that. It's about them. So he would have all of these lessons, but he would teach me in the most painful way possible.
Yes. Yeah. It's so funny you share that is the characteristic of your mentor is, I would say, at least I asked the mentor question to every guest on the Growth Fire podcast, and no one's ever answered, no, I didn't have any mentors. But the answers, there's so many different, one, I had just one, I had one, a couple different, I had one, but they changed 2 or 3 times during the course of my career, or I had a bunch of them, or I learned something from everybody. But probably 1/3 of the things that mentors do that is probably not intentional, but guests constantly compliment, which helped mold them, is the charisma of how their mentor carried themselves. And there's 2 sides of that. You talked about the side that had you worried crazy because you spent 2 weeks making this presentation, and they're out late at night the night before and walk into this meeting and don't say anything about your presentation, but dazzle the daylights out of these people. Obviously, anybody in that situation would be highly offended of all the work they had put together and like, what the heck are they doing? This and that. But if the outcome of the meeting was successful, it's like, okay, I probably don't want to be the front side of that equation, but I do want to learn on how to have that kind of charisma in the room and probably genuinely care about the people. And but you said another great nugget there. It's not about you and your company, it's about them. And it sounds like you learned, how to be able to light up a room with charisma and making sure that the buyer, understood that you're there to help them, not to tell them about how good you and your company are. And I think that's a lesson that not everybody's learned, the opportunity of it's about them, not about you. And, I learned an old quote, and we both have a lot of good quotes, but I learned an old quote a long time ago, and it goes something along the lines of, in sales, it goes, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them accordingly. And, it comes out there because all too often, we're talking too much in the business development process and not listening enough. And it sounds like, your mentor just had some interesting characteristics, but had amazing charisma and something that, I could see in just how you carry yourself. You've got a great charisma. You genuinely care about people. You're entertaining, you're fun. You care about success. You care about their outcomes. And obviously it's why you're so successful at what you do today.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Last question for you, Jon. Where do you get your inspiration from today?
Lots of places. I mean, it could be from movies, podcasts. I read a lot. We actually have a book club at the company, which is something that I love. And I fought for when we read a bad book and everybody wants to quit.
Right.
Yeah. So I think it's lots of places. And I think in kind of going back to those mentors, when you read these authors, whether they're alive or dead or anything, those are mentors in a sense too, right?
Yes.
Because these are people that you're learning from, whether you can actually have a real connection or whatnot. So yeah, I think everywhere and anywhere is probably not the best answer, but I mean that's the truth.
Yeah, it just sounds like you have an open appetite to consume, and it's from multiple different avenues.
Yeah, I'm always looking for inspiration too. Like something will just light me up where I'm just like, whoa. And then next thing you know, it's like 11:30 at night and I'm up till like 3 a.m. just working on something, which kind of messes up your next day. But at the end at the end, like you have something from that. And I'm always looking for that.
Yeah, you grew a little bit. You just, let it get, got consumed in the journey. Jon, so we thank you so much for sharing your story. We've been talking with Jon Tsourakis, President, Chief Revenue Officer of Oyova. Ovea. Say it again.
You got it right the first time, man.
Oyova. Yes. I'm gonna practice that 15 times tonight. But anyway, Jon, thank you so much. We really appreciate you sharing your story. I think some people may want to double click on some of the marketing lessons and things that you shared today. If anybody wants to reach out to you, what's the best way they can contact you?
You can shoot me an email, john@oyova.com, or reach out to me on LinkedIn. I love connecting with new people that aren't trying to sell me lead generation for agencies.
That is so funny. Jon, thank you so much for being an amazing guest on our Growth Fire podcast today. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your insights, and we wish you ongoing success with your journey.
Thank you, Kevin, man. You've been an inspiration and a great friend and a mentor, man. Really appreciate the time today.
Enjoyed your time today. Thanks, Jon.
Thanks for listening to the Growth Fire podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.